Hey guys, it's Sam for Digital Meet again, and in this free plugin for Cinema 4D video, we're going to be taking a look at a plugin called HoRope. This basically allows you to create rope-like objects that are dynamic, and there's lots of cool stuff you can do with it. So without further ado, let's just jump straight in. Okay, I've got a relatively empty scene here. I've just got this scene object, and you can see there's some background, sky, all the rest of it. I've got some lights in there, and this is just a default scene that I've set up. You really don't need to worry about this because we're going to be dealing mainly with the plugin itself. Which brings me to where you get it. I'll be putting this link in the description of the video, but this is where you get it. It's on GitHub here, and it's made by a dude called Pashaho, I think that is, which probably spawns the name HoRope. You'll notice as well that this, in the description, it says this has been tested on Cinema 4D R18 and R19. I'm actually using R21, and we'll get to that later because there is a bit of an issue, but there's a quick fix for it. Anyway, the way you download this is go up here to code, go grab the download zip. Once you get it, unzip the folder that's inside, and then, as usual, put that in your Cinema 4D plugins folder. Once that's done, you go to extensions, and you'll notice that you'll have something called HoRope in there, and that's what we're going to be using. Okay, so HoRope. First of all, we're going to need to actually create a spline. So I'm going to come out of my camera. You've probably got an empty scene, whereas I've got a little scene set up. It's not really that complicated. It's just some lights, a floor, and I've set up a bit of espresso, so when I change the color of the floor, the background color changes. You're not going to need to worry about any of that. Like I said before, you can do everything that I'm doing in this video just with the plugin itself. Okay, so first things first then, I'm going to go into my top view. You can see our lights are here. I'm just going to hide them actually. Let's just hide our lights from the scene so we don't actually see them. We're not going to be changing any of that anyway. It really doesn't matter. And I'm just going to create a spline. So I'm going to go into this, spline pen. I'm just going to create two dots like this and then escape. And then what I'm going to do is rectangle, select those dots, go into my scale tool, and then scale these so they're on the level. Hold shift so it snaps to increments, and now that's fully straight. Go back into object mode, and I'm going to lift this up a little bit as well. I'm also going to turn off that and get rid of our grid as well actually, so it's just a bit more clear. There we go. So there's our spline floating in space, and in fact I can probably hide the floor as well. We don't really need to see that. So this is what you'll be seeing in your scene, and just so we know where the floor is, let's get the grid back on. So I've lifted that up a little bit, and we've got this spline object. I'm going to grab that spline and just drag it to the bottom there, and then all we have to do is go to extensions, go to HoRope, and I'm going to hold Alt, and that will make this a parent of the spline, and you can see that we've got an object already. So let's have a look at it. Well, part of the reason this isn't lit is because I've actually turned the lights off in my scene, so we actually don't want to do that. We want to leave the lights on, but we just don't want this stuff getting in the way. So go to filter, and we'll go to light, turns them off. So this is what we get in our scene. Click HoRope, and we have a few options here. We've got this option here called bones, and we get a slider with it, and you can see that the less we have, the less quote-unquote bones we have. These aren't actually bones like you think they are. If you're thinking these are like joints, they're not. They're actually going to be objects, and they're basically cylinders. But the gist of it is, the more of these you got, the more resolution you've got in your sort of dynamic chain, if you like. I'm just going to put this up to something like 20. That'll do the job. I'm not too sure whether this is large enough yet, but we'll see actually. In fact, I could grab the spline, go into point mode, and I think we can grab a point there and a point there, and it should grab both of them. And then I can actually scale this spline out like this, so they're a little bit longer. There we go. Go back into object mode, go back to HoRope. So we've got 20 bones in there. The radius is 15 currently. You can make that thinner or larger. I think something around the 15 mark is probably going to be okay. Maybe a little bit smaller. Yep, 12's fine. Segment caps, that's just how many segments each cap has got. It's currently set to 3, and if I put this up to 4, I think 4 is the highest, but you can see that it changes this. And obviously, you know, you can go lower. 1, 2. I'm just going to go 3. That seems fine to me. And the segment rotations is 8. And if I zoom in to this, you can see that you can lower this, or you can make this larger. I'm going to leave it at 8 because that seems like a good enough sort of resolution for dynamic collisions, but not too high that, you know, you start getting really bogged down. So I'm going to leave that as is. Now we've got some options underneath. We've got create controls and we've got create sweep. Now, if I click on create sweep, you'll notice that this changes. So let's click on create sweep, and then you can see that we've got this sweep object. Now, if you look up here, you see that there's nothing that implies there's a sweep there. And these checkboxes can be seen as your prep work, really, because we're going to make this editable in a minute, this HoRope object. And depending on your options here, that will dictate what your editable version of this looks like. Okay, moving on to the last one, we've got show sweep bones. So this, you know, if you've got this off, it will show the bones that are underlying. And if you've got this clicked on, it will show the sweep. That's all that does. So now we've got our object ready. Let's just go to HoRope and press C. Before I do that, actually, what I'm going to do is create a little null and rename this backup. And I'm going to control drag a copy of this into backup and just hide backup completely. To hide it both from render and from the view here, I just held Alt while I clicked both of these till the traffic lights turned red. Okay, so now we've got our backup. I'm going to select this and press the C button, and we can actually go through what's gone on here. So let's unfold HoRope and let's have a look. So we've got HoRope, which is our sort of overriding null. That's our head parent object, and under that we've got another thing called HoRope. But this time it's got a dynamic tag on it, and if we look at this, we can see that the dynamics are turned on and are enabled. The tag itself is applied to all children, and yeah, I think it's just a rigid body tag. This spline is the spline that we created originally, so that was this reference. This isn't used anymore, so in fact you can see it in the viewport here. So I'm just going to hide this from the view so it's not in the way. If we open this up, we've got a few objects in here. We've got our sweep, which is self-explanatory. It's a circle and a tracer. And you're probably thinking, why is there a tracer in there and not this spline? But we'll get to that in a minute as well. We've got the controls. So we've got this root object here. And we've also got the target object here. And we've got a couple of collision tags on it as well. Now, if I remember rightly, these are enabled, but there's no dynamics on them. We'll get to those in a minute as well. So let's fold that back up. Now the connectors. This is the difference between, say, making a dynamic spline and this. Because you're probably looking at this going, oh yeah, it's a rope and it's a dynamic spline. I could do that. I could make a spline, make it dynamic, and then put a sweep on it. Big whoop. Why would I use this over doing my own setup or something? And that's because this isn't a dynamic spline. This is actually dynamic objects. So if you look in connectors, you'll see that we've got a bunch of dynamic connectors here, and they're visualized in the viewport here. And if I go along these, you'll go, oh yeah. And if you actually look in the attributes of this, you can see bone 6 is connected to bone 5 via this dynamic connector, and all along the chain as well. So let's fold that back up, and you can see that the bones are hidden as well. And the bones are essentially capsule objects. These are the things that are connected via these connector objects. So let's just unhide these so we can see them in the viewport. And I'm going to turn off the sweep for a minute. And these are our bones. So bone 0, bone 1, all the way up the chain, and they're being connected via these connectors. Bone 0 to bone 1, blah, 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 and all the rest of it. So we've got this chain set up. Now to set that up yourself would have, you know, taken a while. You know, this does it for you, which is really great. We don't actually need to care about the bones, so we can hide the bones and let's unhide our sweep again. There we go. I suppose we can just hit play and see what happens. We've got 30 seconds on the clock here, so, you know, you might need a bit more time. And bugger all happens. Go back one. Now in your scene, something will happen. In my scene, the reason something's not happening is because it's my fault, actually. I've set gravity to 0, so let's just reset that to the default and press play again. So this is what should be happening, and is probably what's happening in your scene as well. Now, these control points here allow us to move this thing around. So if I grab the root, make sure I'm in object mode, and in the move tool, I should be able to move this object about. But oh look, it's not working. Now, this has been tested in version R18 and R19, and it does work when you do this, but in this version it doesn't work. But it's okay, there's a fix for this problem where you move that and nothing happens here. You've got to be playing, by the way, when that happens, but you can see nothing happens. And the reason for that is, if we go to our controls and then go to the root and target, you've got these dynamics tags on them. We can select both of these, go to the collision tab, and where it says apply to children, we can just say none. And that sorts our issue out. So now, this should work. So press that, grab the root, and oh look, we've now got a dynamic rope, which is actually based on dynamics and not based on spline dynamics. The upshot of this is, when you do something with spline dynamics, you have to tell another object that it's a spline collider, whereas this just uses normal Mograph dynamics. So if I put a cube in the scene, and on this cube, bring it down here, I put a simulation tag on it. Let's put a collider body, and then we press play. I can grab this cube and actually interact with this. There you go. All good. If you notice you're getting some clipping, or it's kind of shooting through the box, you'll notice there it's shooting through a little bit. You can always adjust those settings in your project. So if I press, I think it's Control D, it will bring us to our project settings and go to dynamics, and then we can go to this expert tab here, and you can just up your steps per frame and maximum solver iterations. You'll get a more accurate solve. I'm not going to do that because I want to keep this quick and you know, not chugging. So let's delete the cube. I think I've made my point with this. So yeah, that's how you get everything going. Now, if I wanted to make a bunch of copies of this, you'd be probably thinking, oh yeah, I'll just dump that in a cloner. So let's just do that. Let's grab this entire thing. In fact, I could probably do it on that one. Let's do it on that one. Okay, so get the entire thing, put it in a cloner object. So let's go simulate, sorry, Mograph, cloner, hold Alt. So this is in, you know, this is the parent, and we don't want it copied that way. We want it copied on the Z direction. So let's do something like this, and let's press play now. Well, nothing's happening. The fact that it's in a cloner has broke all of that. So what you're going to have to do if you want to copy this is actually make this cloner editable. So what I would suggest is make sure you've got all of this set up like you want before you actually make your cloner editable, because then it'll make everything in there real, and you'll have to go through it one by one, changing the settings for each clone of HoRope. So it's just something to think about there. So that's the long and short of it for these HoRope copies, I suppose, in terms of what they can do. You've got a dynamic rope, they'll interact with all kinds of objects, and you've got control points for them. So if you wanted to, you could hang this from a ceiling in a room or something. You could even parent this control point to another object. So when the object moves along, this control point goes along with it. So it's kind of pinned to it. So it's really, really handy getting a result for a rope that's really quick and works with regular dynamics. Oh yeah, something else I wanted to note, that in this HoRope here, the reason for this tracer, that's what I wanted to say. If we actually look at the tracer, we can see that in the tracer is actually the connectors, and the tracing mode is connect all objects. So that's how it's working. Because of these are dynamic and they follow along with the dynamic bones, and these come along for the ride, that means this tracer object constantly updates and comes along for the ride as well. That's why it's set up this way, as far as I can tell. So what could we actually do with this? Well, there's loads actually, because these aren't a dynamic spline and they are, you know, Mograph dynamics. We can do tons of stuff with this, which is really, really cool. So I'm going to turn on a load of my scene elements again. So let's open up the scene. Let's turn on the floor so you can see it. And we've got all our lights on. Let's go back to our camera view. And I think that's fine. And I'm going to grab this. In fact, I'm going to delete the HoRope thing. Actually, let's bring that back because I want the spline out of this. Let's grab that. Let's delete HoRope. Let's have a look at this spline again, because I think it's a little bit long, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of going outside the bounds of our view here. Let me scale this. I'm going to scale it this way so it's not too long. Something like that. And we'll put this back in the cloner. And we'll put this cloner on the floor, actually. Just so we can see where everything is. And how many clones of this do we want? Well, let's get our spline in HoRope. So again, extensions. I'm going to hold Alt so it gets put inside that. And then we can start tweaking our settings. Again, I'm going to give it 20 bones. That'll do. And actually, I think I want these to be a little bit thinner. Maybe 10 centimeters, something like that. We don't need controls for this one, because I don't need to control these. I'm actually going to control these with dynamic forces. So I'm going to create a sweep. They're actually swept objects, and I think they're a little bit thick. Maybe bring them down a little bit, 8 centimeters. We're going to leave that ticked on as well. We're going to go into the cloner, because I think they're a little bit too spread out, and let's make these 4 copies. And let's move the cloner up a little bit. Actually, I think that's going to be okay. Maybe they can be closer together. Yeah, let's make it 100 centimeters. Let's shift this up a little bit so they're in the scene like this. And I'm going to need them to be able to stick to something. So let's create a sphere as well. And I'm going to raise this up so it's kind of in the air like this. And let's make this a hexahedron. And the reason I'm doing that is because with the standard sphere, even though it will render perfect, if I render this now, it will render like a perfect sphere, right? But the dynamic interactions is what I'm concerned about. Everything gets sort of pinched to a point at the top, and I don't want that. So hexahedron keeps everything quads, but the distribution's a little bit better. And I'm also going to crank this up to maybe 20. So that it's a bit more, yeah, maybe a little bit more, 25, something like that. That'll do. Okay, so we've got our sphere. Let's put this here like this. Okay, so now we're happy with our setup and everything. We can actually make the cloner editable. But if we do that, you'll see that inside this cloner, we've still got, we've basically got copies of our HoRope object. And we don't have access to any of the stuff going on inside it, if you know what I mean. We've got to make those editable. So let's go back and let's make this editable first, and then make our cloner editable, and then we'll have, you know, all of these editable within. Right, so let's see if this works. Right, well, they pop up, and the reason they do that is because on my floor, in fact, I should probably select these and put them on the floor. There we go. My floor has actually got a tag on it, which is just a collision tag. So if you right click, simulation tags, collider body, dynamic stuff will collide with the floor now. Okay, so that in mind, we're going to actually use forces to play around with this now. let's put some forces in our scene. I'm going to create a null somewhere to put our forces. And I'm actually going to, I don't know, it's under our sphere here. And let's call this forces. Forces, there we go. And let's go to simulate. Forces. And let's give this a turbulence, actually. And I'll just put this in my forces. It doesn't need to be in this null, by the way. I'm just trying to keep things tidy and organized. So we've got a turbulence in there now. So let's just give it a play and see what happens. You can see something's happening. Not quite sure what, but yeah, we can definitely see something's happening. So let's up the strength a little bit. Let's make this 10 centimeters and let's make the scale, I don't know, 50%, something like that, and see what that does. Okay, these moved a little bit, but not much is going on really, and that's because the floor has got a dynamic tag on it, which is just set to collision, so that won't go anywhere. But the other reason is, remember earlier when I had to turn gravity back on? So if we press Control D, we get to our project settings, go to Dynamics, General. The gravity is actually set. I want to turn this off completely, so there is no gravity, so these won't fall down. And now you can see this turbulence is having an effect on this. So it's basically like 0G basically. So these objects are now being affected by this turbulence object. So that looks pretty cool, but you'll notice that they're going through my sphere. So that needs a collision on it as well. So let's go back a little bit. Let's go to our sphere, right click, simulation tags, and we don't want this to fall down or be moved. But we do want it to interact with these. So this can be a collider body too. So simulation, collider body. Now I'm hoping these will actually interact with our sphere. Oh goody. Yep, they're going up. Great, so it's hitting the side of that now. So the other thing that we can do is actually put an attractor in the middle of this sphere, and then these will be pulled towards it and they'll start squirming around on the surface. So let's go to simulate, forces, attractor. I'm going to put this under the sphere just so I can zero out its position. And then we can drag this out and put it in our forces. There we go. Now when we press play, these should be attracted to this. Although this might need to be stronger, so let's have a look at our attractor. Well, the strength is set to 10, let's set it to something like 50. And that should be a lot stronger. Let's rewind this as well to see what kind of effect that's having. And also, if we want these sliding around the surface of the sphere, we have to think about their tag settings as well. If I go to the sphere's collision tag and go to collision, we can see that the friction is at 100%. Now, if I turn this down to, say, I don't know, 30, it means that these can actually squirm around the surface of this much more easily. And we can do the same thing for the actual objects themselves as well. And again, this might have been, what's that set to? The friction is set to 90. I actually quite like the look of that at the moment, so I'm not too bothered really. That's fine. And I wouldn't mind putting this cloner inside a subdivision surface as well. So if we go back to the beginning and then let's subdivide this, now you can see that they're going to be a lot smoother. I think 2 is a little bit too much, so I'm going to turn these down to 1 for the render and the editor. And let's see what the result is now. Yeah, they look a lot nicer now. And you can see those wrapping around there. Like so. There's an object here that I'm not too... it's the splines, okay? So if I unfold all of these and then these splines here, I can hide them from the view. They're not necessary. They're just the splines we created in the first place. It sort of keeps a backup copy of them. Let's get rid of them and close them all up. So that's fine. And this should still work as intended. There we go. So what I'm going to do now is go back to the beginning. I'm going to grab all of our copies of this and actually control drag these up up to here. So now we've got 2 sets, and they should all not only interact with the sphere, but interact with each other as well. Now you've got to be careful at this point because, you know, the more stuff you got in there, the more they're going to interact with each other, more calculation, and you can already see my viewport is getting a little bit slower now. That's looking good. That's just the kind of thing you can do with this, which is absolutely fantastic. Something else we can do as well. If you do something like this, or even heavier, of course it's going to get bogged down, and it's not going to play back in real time. One thing you can do is go here, hold down, and then you can click off all frames. So instead of playing every single frame, it will skip frames to make sure that things run smoother. You know, it's okay, but so that's one solution. The other solution is to bake the dynamics of the scene. Something else you should note as well, this is something that I discovered. These tags here, if you go to dynamics, in fact, I'm going to save the scene here so I don't lose anything. This tag, what I could do is actually play this and say set initial state, right? Let's play this. Get to a point that we like, and then I could say set the initial state for these objects. Now, I've tried this and it actually doesn't work on a tag basis, and I don't think you can do that on a project basis. Let me have a look. General, so you can cache everything. Expert, nope. So yeah, you're gonna have to do it by per tag, if you like. So if I unravel these, we'll do all of them. Okay. And let's go back to the top. You've got this on the initial HoRope thing, which is a collision tag. The dynamics are on, it's enabled. The collision is applied to children, so it applies to everything in there. And it's set to move in mesh because obviously, you know, the surface is moving, if you like. And then we've got the cache, and we can bake that, but we're going to bake everything at the same time. But we've also got the set initial state. So like I said, I'm going to save it at this point because this will break probably, and I'm going to select all of these tags. Oh, by the way, if you're thinking, is this the right tag? Yes. If you come down here, the sweeper's got a tag on it, but it's not even enabled. I don't even know why that's on there, to be honest. The connectors don't have anything on them, and the bones don't either. So this is the only tag that's really doing it. So this is the one that we've got to set the initial state on. We'll grab that, grab these. Let's grab all of those. And we're at a point in the animation that we like. So let's say set initial state. We've done that. Let's go back to the beginning. And all of these reset, which is bizarre. If I press play now, they're having a bit of a problem. So for some reason that doesn't work. If anyone's got an idea why, I'd love to hear it, but for now, my advice is not to use that, which is a shame, really. So I'm just going to close all projects and get to the point I had before we actually did that. And I'm going to fold all this up. So, Control D, go to your dynamics, go to the cache, and we can cache our entire scene. So let's do that. Okay, it's done, and it's back to the beginning of the animation. And now we can scrub through this because it's baked the dynamics down to that kind of animation. So this bit at the beginning that you might not want, now it's baked down, you could literally sort of go, okay, so around 9 seconds is where I like it to start. And then you can basically tell your renderer to start from 9 seconds onwards. So that's the way I sort of figured that problem out. And also, it just means that you can play back as well, without too much lag going on. There we go, a nice sort of dreamy 0G animation there. Okay, so I've got some, I've actually got some materials I already set up. The background of the floor is already part of this sort of default scene that I've saved somewhere. But I set up a red material. All it is this colour, this reflectance. It's just a Beckman with a 20% roughness on it. So nice and simple. So let's put that on the sphere. And this is what I've called worms, which are basically our HoRope objects. In the colour, I've just sort of made it this sort of beige. And in the luminance, I've put a gradient. And I've made it sort of dark red to a sort of lighter red in there. So it basically just highlights some edges and it gives the illusion of like a subsurface scattering, but for a lot cheaper. And in the reflectance, I've made a Beckman layer that's got a 30% roughness. Displacement, I've got a gradient in there again. And if we look inside here, this is a little bit mental, but I'll show you what I did in the color channel. So if I go to color, texture, gradient, let's go into this, and we've got this. All I did was I doubled the knots, and you can see we've got a couple laid on top of each other in there. Distribute them so they're laid out a bit better, and then I doubled. So you can just keep doubling these as such. Don't worry about the distribution. So we double the knots, and then you can say distribute, and then you get these lines. And I basically grab that and put it in our displacement. Also, to get it actually working the right way, I turned this from 2DU to 2DV, and now it's the right way up. So that's all I did there. So I'm going to clear this from our color channel, and basically what I've just shown you is what I did for our displacement channel here. I turned on subpolygon displacement and a subdivision level of 2. So I'm going to put these on our HoRope objects now, and I'm just going to copy this down our list. There we go. And oh, I'm missing one. There we go. So let's give this a render and just see what it looks like. Let's have a look at our output. 1920 by 1080. We don't need it that big. Let's just make it 1000 for your benefit. Oh, let me go back and lock the ratio so it actually... And we don't need to save this either, so let's turn that off. We're all good, so let's give that a render. Now you're probably looking at this and going, okay, that looks weird, and there's a couple of reasons for this. This isn't central, because when I set this up, actually, I was creating the thumbnail, the video, so ignore that. But the actual worms themselves actually don't look correct either, and there's a good reason for that. It looks like there's geometry sticking out and it doesn't look right. And the reason for that is, and I should have thought about this before I did this, but if we actually look into the HoRope thing, we can see the bones are hidden in the viewport. So if I turn this off, you'll be able to see them. There we go, you can see them now. But they're not actually hidden from the renderer. So you've got to make sure that these are turned off. So I'm going to alt-click these traffic lights until they're red. And I'm going to do that for each one. Okay, so now those are all hidden from the renderer as well as the viewport. Let's give it another go. Right, there we go. And you can see the ends are looking a bit pinched here. And that's because the sweep has got a certain cap setting. So if we go into the sweep and select it, you can see that the caps are set to N-gon. And you probably want to do something like Delaunay or regular grid or something like that, and you'll get a much better result. That's essentially the plugin and what it does. Of course, there's much more scope for this than I've shown in this tutorial video. Because they're dynamic, you can do all kinds of stuff with them. You could actually set up rigs if you wanted to, like pulleys and all that kind of stuff, because these objects are actually bones. So I'm going to go away and have a little play with this and see what else I can come up with, but that's the general gist. So I hope you guys found this helpful, or at least interesting, and I'll see you for the next one. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell to be notified of new tutorials. You can follow me on social media at Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram, and make sure to visit me at digitalmeat.uk where you can vote for upcoming tutorials. Thanks for watching, bye!